Welcome to Made Simple. Today we're going to be talking about working capital, specifically what it is, why we need to know it, and how to calculate it. But before we begin, make sure you subscribe and smash that like button. Just smash it. Smash that like button, please. Thank you. So, working capital is a ratio that I think gets thrown out there a lot, and a lot of times people don't really know what it means or really how it's calculated or anything like that. So, working capital is calculated by taking the current assets minus current liabilities. I always have trouble with that word. Current liabilities. So working capital is not a super complex formula. But now that you see that, you're kind of like, all right, great. Like I understand current assets minus current liabilities, but what does that really mean? So before we go into that, let's talk about what current assets are and current liabilities, and we'll just say C. Well, we'll spell it out here. Current assets and current liabilities. Current assets, and here I'm just gonna just kind of merge this real quick. So current assets are basically, you could think of them as the short-term assets in a company. So within, there are things that within the next year are going to be sold off or are going to be used up within a year. But let's just go over a few current assets and a few current liabilities that you may come across. So current assets are definitely considered cash, accounts receivable or AR, whoops, AR, inventory. Inventory is also considered a current asset, and even prepaid expenses are current assets. Now these are kind of the four more common current assets you're going to find. There's also cash equivalents and things like that. But for the sake of this video, we'll just leave it at those four. Current liabilities, it's kind of the same idea here. Liabilities are kind of like those liabilities are those commitments that will expire within a year, and those things can be like short-term debt, accounts payable, as well as interest payable, or even notes, or dividends payable. And obviously, that's again not limited to this list, but just some common ones that you'll generally find under current assets and current liability columns. All right, so now that we have a better sense of how working capital is calculated, let's talk a little bit about what that means. So working capital basically is a test to see how liquid a company is, which in turn kind of talks about a company's short-term financial success. So referring to liquidity, basically what it means is if I had to pay off all my current liabilities right now, and how good of a job would my current assets do at paying that off? So working capital is important to kind of see like a company's short-term financial health or its liquidity, or in a way you could even say how well its operational ability or efficiency is. And so when you calculate working capital, generally what you want is a positive number. So if you have a negative number, that means that your current assets aren't really covering your current liabilities. So a more positive number is generally what you're looking for. However, there is a few exceptions to this rule. For example, I could have a ton of current assets by having a ton of inventory. But just because I have a ton of inventory doesn't mean that financially healthy or my operational efficiency is really that great. So this number can be misleading, but that's why there's so many other ratios at work. You can't just look at one ratio at a time in order to assess a company's financial health. All right, so let's go through a practice here in calculating working capital, and here I have kind of something set up. And generally, obviously, so this is not what a balance sheet will generally look like. It's not formatted correctly, and there's some errors. There's a lot of things missing out. This is really what a balance sheet should look like. But now that you kind of get the idea of what it should look like, here I've chosen a few current assets that we talked about before, and just put some numbers in here. And so basically what we're going to do, let's sum up the current assets, and we'll just put that down here, and we'll sum up the current liabilities. And then what we're going to do is just take the current assets and subtract them from the current liabilities. So our working capital is 2,000. And just looking at this, I would say that this company is pretty liquid, is pretty, the short-term financial health of this company is pretty good. I feel like we're doing pretty well with operations here. Looking here, we don't have a ton of money in inventory. We have a little bit of prepaid expenses paid, got some good cash, and accounts receivable. So I would say overall, based off of this working capital, we're pretty solid. And so going back here, just to kind of summarize everything, working capital basically tells you how liquid a company is. And a lot of people like to look at this ratio because they want to know what happens if a company is facing problems in the short term, how they're going to work to overcome those problems. Because obviously a lot of companies need to look long term, but they might come into short term issues where they don't have the liquidity necessary to fix those. So generally companies with a positive working capital could be seen as less risky. So hopefully you enjoyed that quick introduction into working capital. It's a pretty common ratio used when assessing a company. And always make sure you subscribe and smash that like button before you leave. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great day. Bye.